All right. What's up, guys? I hope you're doing well. Want to go over my new posts. I've recently found that basically a lot of people don't really understand the banking system or like how it works, and that's myself included to an extent. Um, it's something that I've been reading into and really kind of pretty much researching. I'd throw it in that definition too. And coming from my background, if you've seen some of my previous videos, I'm very particular on what you would define as research, especially since I come from a physics background to where I actually did research in a lab and everything else. Um, so, and it's something I've becoming rather interested in, and I really want to, well, let's just say my friends and family don't want to hear it. So maybe writing about it and talking about it as well will help me get it off my chest and hopefully get feedback as well. So one of the major things that I've noticed, and we're going to start with the Federal Reserve because Central Bank of the United States, I felt like that was a good starting point. Um, and then from there we can kind of branch off. And so just kind of this one is basically just a general overview because even there's some things that people just don't understand. Like for the simple fact of when people think of the Fed, they tend to think of the New York Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Well, that's just one of them. That's not all of them. It's actually it's the Federal Reserve System. It's an entire system, which we'll get into much more in depth. And this system has five different functions, right? Um, so one that conducts the national monetary policy for the United States. So there's that. Basic. I don't want to say it doesn't control the money, and that's kind of a nuanced discussion. But I guess if you don't have any previous experience or if you don't have any previous experience or study of the banking system and stuff like that, it's probably a good kind of way to start. It's technically not true, but close enough. At least for now, until we get more into the depths and weeds and everything else. But they basically do this and they try to influence the dollar and the economy and stuff like that. To fit their congressionally defined goals of maximize employment and price stability, right? And a lot of the times they do that through expectations policy, which we'll get into much more further down the road, um, as it's relatively new and they pretty much just have like Fed funds rate and expectation policies. There's some other stuff like that I'm not as familiar with. Um, like how the Federal Reserve deals in like the repo market and stuff like that. But that's all to come. Um, we'll get into that. Trust me. Trust me, we'll get there. Um, Another one of their functions is to promote stability in the financial system and to basically try to minimize the systemic risks. Um, And by the way, the functions and stuff that I'm listing off right now come straight from the Federal Reserve's website themselves. Um, the reason I say that is because of this actively monitoring and engaging in the U.S. and abroad. Maybe that's just a quirk of mine, but I kind of like I. Let's just say I sympathize with the free market capitalism point of view. And so kind of any form of um, public involvement in that is kind of to varying degree. It's arguable. We'll get more in depth in that. That's not the purpose of this post. I don't want to try. I want to try to refrain from going down too many rabbit holes in an overview video. Um, that's what the rest of the posts are for. So, especially when you're dealing with something that is as complex and omnipresent as the financial system and everything else. This is the speed at which things happen really does matter. and you deal with this a lot in physics as well. Especially when you get higher up, it seems like everything, like, I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever taken, unless you've taken like college level physics, not like the algebra based one, but like the actual physics classes, it just kind of feels like if you're just given like certain like axioms and stuff, and do this math and blah blah blah. And it doesn't really, you don't really understand anything, or like you can kind of understand the concepts, but it doesn't really make that much sense. Um, until you start to get further down the road, and when you start delving into like the deep calculus and everything else, and it starts to become absolute hell. um, you you actually start to understand why certain things happen. Um, and that's it's kind of the same thing here, right? And I don't know how I got to that. I'm already failing on the whole rabbit hole thing. I will eventually get better. But so the speed and volatility of markets and any kind of indicators and everything too can have a drastic impact because people there are entities in the real economy that actually pay attention to the stuff that the Federal Reserve does, obviously, and so and the data that they give out. Um, and that not just the Federal Reserve, but like the BLS and the BAE Bureau of Economic Analysis. That one. I'm not so great with acronyms. I'm sure that'll have to change from what I've been looking into. But anyways, another one of their functions is to promote safety and soundness of individual financial institutions and monitor their influence on the entire financial system. So I'm just going to highlight this. Um, Make sure you guys can see what I highlight. Awesome, you can. Yeah, this one right here. That is going to make it green. I don't even know how well that shows up on a screen share. But yeah, we're just going to leave that as enough said. GFC and stuff like that. Uh, Again, further posts. This is a general overview. Um, Another one of their functions is to promote consumer protection and community development, and also kind of foster payment and settlement system safety and efficiency. Um, so, central banks, obviously, they're going to deal with payment and settlement systems on a national and global scale. So, that's self explanatory. And then this is more of a kind of political side of things because it is a public entity. It's kind of public slash private, and I'll get into the nuance in that in the next post that I'm actually in the middle of writing, um, which will kind of go more into why it's why it's a mix of public and private interests, um, instead of just like it's not technically just a government entity. It's but it's not only a private entity. There's a next post. I'll get into it later, way more in depth. Um, okay, so again, the Federal Reserve is not a single entity. It's actually an entire system. There are 12 regional banks, a central governing board, which is the Board of Governors, and then there's the oh my God, Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, which you've probably heard about. So yes, and as you can probably guess, the Board of Governors is the governing board. That's the one that actually does the whole press conferences with Jerome Powell. I don't know. I almost said with Congress, but press conference is a conference with the press. Um, Anyways, but they do meet with Congress on a regular basis. Again, I'll get more into the more in depth and like how many times a year and so on and whatever in the next post because that's in there. But yeah, it reports and it's accountable to Congress. And then you have the reserve banks, which are the 12 different regional reserve banks. And those are more the operating entities. So they're the ones who actually like kind of do things. Um, I'll get way more in depth in what they actually do in the next post. Because the next post is literally going through one by one and being like, this is what the Federal Open Market Committee does. This is what the Board of Governors does. This is what the Federal Reserve Banks do, and everything else. It's like actually going in, what does each branch do? Again, this is general overview, and I'm trying not to go too deep into rabbit holes. Right. And so then you have the FOMC, which is responsible for doing open market activities, right? We'll get more in depth into what that means. So the general structure, right? Here's a map of each of the 12 regions and which bank. It's the 12 banks. You got the one where it's in Boston in Region 1, New York for Region 2, and so on. And notice, I did not know this beforehand, but I thought it was pretty interesting. But you notice how they're not all of the boundaries are exactly online. One of the cool things when I first started looking into it, I was still in college, and I was in college in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is around here. Because here's Memphis, and it's like right here on the border almost. And so I was confused on like which are we in the Atlanta Fed or the St. Louis Fed? And I didn't know. I don't think I ever dove deep enough to figure out because I was in college. I was pretty busy. But these I just gave it away. These boundaries and everything else are actually based off of the original trade regions, the major trade regions that existed in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was actually signed. So that's why they're based off that. And this kind of ties into why they're private entities, or at least why it would make sense to me why it would be where the private sector kind of plays into it with the reserve banks. So basically, how it used to be was each region each has its own reserve bank, right? And so each would have they'd act independently basically, so they'd have their own discount rates, and everything else that would be different or could be different, we'll say, but they act independently of one another. It's not like that anymore, right? And there's been a few pieces of legislation, and now they have intra-system service agreements and stuff to where they kind of divvy up responsibilities and stuff like that, to actually like not really specialize. I don't think that's the word, like a great word for it, but anyways, we'll get more in depth into it. But it's a lot more centralized now towards more of it's not one entity, but it kind of it's more monetary policy is more based off of it's more of a national scale rather than a regional scale, at least with respect to the Federal Reserve and my current understanding, which could possibly change in future posts and everything else. And that's one of those things with a lot of the stuff, as I stated before, this is including the whole and the understanding of the banking system includes me, right? And that's why I'm doing it. And so by me researching it, me writing about it, and me doing these videos and everything else, I'm learning about it. And if you happen to be someone who knows, maybe I misspoke, maybe I haven't heard some specific piece of legislation or whatever, because I mean, like it has been revised twice. One 20 years after, like 20 years after it was drafted. And I'm talking about the Federal Reserve Act itself. And then also there's the whole Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act of 1980. They love those long names. But basically, there's a whole bunch of like, they had to submit like periodic reports and stuff. I'm going to try and highlight it for you guys. And stuff like that. Anyways, but most of the stuff now, with how the Federal Reserve does, is on a national scope. So this is where the reserve banks kind of get more into the private sector, right? To where it kind of delves more into that, to where they're not, because in the top is pretty much all public, or at least it seems all public. Um, the board of governors are all appointed by the president, and they confirmed by the Senate, stuff like that. And then you have the reserve banks, and the presidents are, if I remember correctly, are I don't remember. I don't know. They're appointed by someone probably. Either the board, either a member of the board or the president himself. I don't remember 100%. I haven't written that part of the next post yet. I have it in my notes. It's just gone at the moment. But anyways, one of the things that I found interesting was this is how it's kind of divvied up between the public and private entity sort of thing. Is the board of directors and stuff for the reserve banks. Um, so they actually have different classes for the directors, and then it kind of like they have A, B, and C, and each class, and like the classes are appointed by different people. Um, like one's appointed by I think the presidents of the bank itself, of the reserve bank, the regional reserve bank, and then one class is appointed by the board of governors and stuff like that. Again, I haven't written that part of this next post, but it's in there. It will be in there at least. I got a nice little picture that I have to put in. So, because one of the things you definitely learn in physics, in a physics degree and everything else, is that when in doubt, just draw a picture. It doesn't matter how hard the concept is, even if it doesn't even make sense. I mean, hell, we got to we were doing relativistic quantum mechanics, and the whole thing is like Feynman diagrams of what we were doing. Um, Basically, like drawing a picture. So it's like it's still applicable. Anyways, but yeah, and then there's the Federal Open Market Committee, which again, open market operations. I don't know really why I said that again. It's not even part of this post. But anyways, so right. One of the things that you should probably that might pop in your head is funding, right? And so, like, how do we pay these people? Because they're not the Federal Reserve System. Isn't entirely a public entity, but it's not entirely private. So, like, how do these people get paid and stuff like that? And actually, it's not through funding from Congress. Um, so it's not public funding. Actually, it's through those open market operations. So, like the interest they receive on bonds, fees from their financial services, and everything else. Because think of the Federal Reserve as a bank of banks, right? And so you have depository institutions, say like J.P. Morgan or another B of A or what another commercial bank that are depository institutions of the Federal Reserve System. They go to their regional reserve bank, and that's basically their bank. They can get loans or whatever from the discount window and stuff like that. And that regional bank will charge them fees for financial services, just like a regular bank does to you or your business or whatever. Um, and so that's one way to do it. And I'm sure there's others. Those are the two I picked. Give a couple examples. So yeah, and then after one of the things too was after the Federal Reserves, like after the year and everything, and all their expenses and everything are paid, then their net earnings are sent to the U.S. Treasury, right? So there is a thing there where they send it to the government. I also put two more links down here. One was to a post I did to the National Banking Act of 1863, which was more of kind of the founding of the national banking system. It is kind of like almost making it so that we could transfer into the Federal Reserve System, not as in like they were hoping to do it beforehand, but as in like it gave the opportunity to, because especially like look at the time, 1863, that doesn't ring a bell. Go back to history class. Um, but it was right around the Civil War, right? And so we had a major switch in how banking was. It became much more, say, I don't know if I'd say nationalized, but it was no longer the kind of wildcat free banking period that we had beforehand. Then I also just put here's the category itself for more of the banking system. So in case you come to this post later, and I have other posts, because this is the first one on which I'm actually going to like specifically do the Federal Reserve System and everything else. And so click this one and it'll take you to the category itself, and you'll see all the new ones, everything else. So you'll have access to all the new ones as well. Whenever I'm done with those, which I mean, like I get one or two done a week. So that's all I got. Hey, did this one for almost 20 minutes. Anyways, so pretty much all I got for this one. I hope you guys have a good night. It is definitely getting late again. And so I hope you guys have a good night, and I'll see you on the next video.